Okay, we'll try that again. I froze there a bit. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. If you guys are watching live on a Wednesday afternoon, if you're watching in playback sometime, almost certainly after Wednesday afternoon. Everyone, thank you for joining us. Very happy to have you. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Vlad and I are really excited to have Colby and Carl of Inductive Automation on, both of them to kind of talk about the journey from the creation of Ignition, because this is the first time we've had both co-founders, co-creators of Ignition on, and then talk about kind of that path and what we're seeing now in the industrial landscape, artificial intelligence, and beyond. So everyone, officially welcome. This is Manufacturing Hub, episode 260. My name is Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. Officially like to welcome Colby and Carl on. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Thank you for having me back so soon after Prove It. So,
absolutely. Colby, Carl, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Before we dive into the actual conversation, for those that may not know who you are, could you please give us a bit of an introduction? Let's start with Carl, please.
Sure. My name is Carl Gould, as you can see on the slide right beneath my face. And I am the CTO at Inductive Automation, also one of the co-founders. It's funny, when we do these introductions, whenever Colby and I are in the same room, I always hope to go second, because his introduction usually covers mine, since our stories are pretty intertwined. But, we've been doing this together for a long time, and so rather than give our whole bio in my intro, I'll let Colby introduce himself, and then we'll probably tell the story together.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Colby Clegg, CEO. And it's funny because, I really often have a very hard, even I've been doing this job for 3 years now in this title, I have a hard time with it because, I still identify with the, software development side of things. And so I think it kind of irks me to say CEO, but I'm loving it. It's great. And so, Carl and I, we've been at this for a long time together. And so, we were the company was founded by Steve Heckman, a systems integrator, and Carl and I met him about 23 years ago next week. So it's been, I think I have on my calendar May 17th as the start date of the company, and in 2003. So there you
go. Well, I guess as a follow-up, right? So obviously at this point, Ignition is extremely well known. I personally, to maybe give you a little bit of context, have learned extensively about Ignition about 6 or so years ago. And originally, my background has been with other vendors, but more and more conversations started happening around, well, now that we're looking to perhaps migrate from an older platform, what are some other more modern ways and more modern solutions that we can move to, and obviously touch at different layers, SCADA, data, MES, and some other solutions. Now, going back to the original, inception of inductive automation, as you have mentioned a little bit, Colby, already, you used to be a systems integrator, right? So could you please take us back maybe to those early roots? I'm particularly curious as to how the opportunity to transition into a product-based company was identified, and also why specifically this product, right? In our space, there's, I think, no lack of different plays that could have been born out of inductive automation.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And I'll try not to dominate. I'll let Carl talk a little bit on the tech side, perhaps. But, from the systems integration point of view, as I mentioned, Steve Heckman and his wife, Wendy Lynn Heckman, had been running a small systems integration firm here in Sacramento, California, since like 1985. So again, 2003 is when we were first introduced to them. So as a systems integrator, doing a lot of food and beverage, a lot of discrete manufacturing in this area, they were mostly a Rockwell house, doing a lot of, just the technologies of the time, but predominantly around Rockwell, Allen Bradley. And I don't mean to bash anyone, so I'm not going to talk about technology that much. It's just to say that, as a normal systems integrator, Steve was incredibly frustrated by increasingly over time what he could deliver to customers, right? The customers are asking for this. He's trying to figure out solutions with that. And he was just frustrated. And so it's actually, kind of interesting because, over time, I've come to learn so many systems integrators, they're always trying to solve solutions. So coming up with products, coming up with software is not, unnormal. It's abnormal. It's something they kind of tend to do. And even they had taken a few stabs at creating software. It didn't quite, work out, or it worked for a little while. So it was really, when he tells the story, it was a reluctant entry into the software market. He didn't intend to become a software company, right? But I'll let Carl talk about like why we got into this space.
Yeah, we came from systems integration roots, but Colby and I come from software engineering roots, right? So calling us personally systems integrators is stretching the truth a little bit. So when we got started, we were brought in because Steve had, as Colby said, sort of reluctantly come to the conclusion that the only way to solve some of his customers' technological problems was to write some solutions himself. So he brings in us to work on some software tools. And originally the concept was as simple as we need to be able to log industrial data and store it in SQL databases, because at that moment in 2003, it was a pretty sort of pivotal moment in technology where all of a sudden the open source movement, Linux, MySQL had already taken the IT world by storm and changed so much of the software landscape. And Steve really wanted to be able to use those types of technologies in the industrial landscape, and there was sort of a missing glue layer in between the OT connectivity piece and the IT capabilities that he saw as just sort of sitting there waiting to be plucked and used in the OT context. And so that's really what Colby and I were brought in to originally solve, that pretty straightforward problem of connecting web servers, SQL databases into the OT world. And we've been sort of running with that general concept ever since.
I joke, just coming in doing the same thing every day for 23 years, and here we are. So
not quite, but sort of.
Interesting, and I think I've heard the story before around the connectivity side, and although I would say that that's a very important component of the current product, I would say that the ability to design full like SCADA and MES solutions has probably, I guess, what people are mostly familiar with. So could you expand maybe how did you go from the connection, maybe components and some of those early modules into a full-fledged Ignition product?
Yeah, one day at a time. It pretty quickly, once we started landing a bunch of OT data inside of SQL databases, the next step seemed clear, which was, well, now that all this data is sitting here in a SQL database, and connectivity to SQL databases is stock standard capability of any kind of IT software platform, how do we build applications around that data?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we started building our original sort of visualization product, which was called Factory PMI. And we started just building an application builder, mostly for ourselves, right? In those early days, we were sort of paired up with a controls engineer, PLC programmer. We would go out in the field. We would want to build applications for customers directly. And it just seemed like the most convenient way to do that wasn't to program them all by hand, because that's too inefficient. And so we started building an application builder for our own purposes. And it wasn't until maybe 2005-06, I think, that we really started having a serious go at being a software company and not just a systems integrator building its own tools.
Yeah, and then I'll just try to accelerate the story a little bit, just to say though that in 2006 or 7 we started going to the market. We got a lot of kind of pushback because, like, you kind of hinted at it. Our first trade show was almost like a stereotypical story of people laughing in our faces of like, do you see how many SCADA products there are here? Like, why do we need another one, right? And we're trying to make our value proposition, our claim, it's modern technology, and we have some interesting licensing and all of these kind of things we believed in. But we had our value proposition, we stuck on it, and then a funny thing happened, which is that all those other companies got consolidated up, and changed and this gap emerged. And so then over the next few years, 2010, we decided to rewrite everything to change some of the technology and to reinforce some of the visions that we had, like these principles we had, namely being platform independent, which was really quite, a novelty at the time for SCADA software. And that's when we released Ignition. And so that was kind of like the main breakout moment. So those two things kind of went, kind of colluded to help us launch, so to speak.
Let me ask you one last question before I pass it over to Dave, right? So talking about factors that are non-technical, right? So obviously you have the technology in place to be successful,
Mm-hmm.
but I would personally argue that there's quite a few components that make Inductive extremely successful in this marketplace, which I would say it's surprising that some of the vendors of much larger size cannot seem to figure out. But what factors make Ignition successful that are not technical, especially in the early days, right? Because as you mentioned, maybe there was some pushback, there was some friction. What are some of those factors?
Well, primarily, a lot of it you can go. I actually, I just recently reread The Innovator's Dilemma, and it pretty much describes exactly what happened with us, right? It's not that the other players couldn't do this technology or whatnot, but what it is just the economic models and kind of the speed and the approach to market. So really for us, we had an economic model that kind of they couldn't compete with in terms of selling, a single low price per server, per gateway for unlimited usage, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Second key point, going after, systems integrators, the people we knew, the people we knew how to talk to. And that also wasn't really aligned with their business model at the time, where a lot of these companies were trying to spin up services groups that were competing with these systems integrators. So I think that's probably the two things that come to my mind. Carl, you have anything else?
There's also some really important cultural differences that we brought with us from our systems integration background that have really helped us and have nothing to do with technology. Accessibility, I think, is a big piece, right? Like, we talk directly to customers and are interested in what they're doing and incorporate their feedback directly into the product, and we always have. We used to have this phrase, we haven't used this recently, but we have always really believed in innovation without permission. And what that means to us is really simple things like, you want to try it out, download it off the website and just use it and see if it works for you. You want to write a module? Sure, go ahead. Open Module SDK, publicly documented. All the documentation's right there. All the education's free on the website.
Yeah.
Those types of things, I think, are really cultural proof points that really seem to speak to integrators, because integrators are always sort of under the gun to solve problems quickly. And when things are gated behind paywalls or sort of, oh, you want this access, well, first you have to go talk to this person and start building a relationship. That just felt like a friction that we didn't want to have to introduce to anybody's day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been very successful, and a large, even just look at our forum, right? We used to get feedback from sort of friendly competitors telling us that we were crazy to have a forum because people might post about bugs in the software, and that's not acceptable because we couldn't admit that such a thing might even exist, which we just thought was sort of silly. So
yeah, and I mean, that's what happens. I know for a fact the competition has scoured that for bugs to put into their sales strategies, and whatever, that's how it goes. So Carl's right. We took a very open approach. Again, it's funny because Carl and I, coming out of a computer science, program in 2003, there were so many things we encountered along the way in the industrial space. We're just like, why is it like that? And it's like, let's just not worry about that. Like, let's just do it the computer science way. It's interesting, but yeah.
And I do think, to Steve's credit, he shielded us from a lot of how things were done in this industry. And so we sort of created a lot of Ignition and Inductive Automation's approach, essentially ignorant of how things were done in other places. And sometimes that was a good thing because it helped us sort of come up with ideas from first principles. Sometimes it ended up that we took sort of a long and winding road to end up at a similar kind of thing. So there was pros and cons to that approach, but I think on the level it was ended up being a really positive approach.
Super
Absolutely.
interesting. Appreciate it.
I think I speak for every engineer who has gone on and downloaded whatever version of Ignition and not had to, provide their name and email and blood test and firstborn child. All of them thank you guys for going down that direction and helping to move the industry down that direction. Certainly.
I appreciate you saying that, Dave, because having the download be not gated behind any required, that has been a line we have had to hold to pretty closely. There's always sort of counter pressure, right?
So many
sales
discussions
and marketing.
internally. I think marketing got it down to like a size 1 font to skip the link, but
Yeah.
I think we're bringing the font size back up. It's
Okay.
there. If you don't know it's there, it is there. But yeah.
when I downloaded my most recent version of 8.3, I did have to squint a little bit. I'm like, I remember a button down here. Did they somehow manage to remove the button? But no, I think everyone, I speak for everyone who's ever had to download it in a technical respect. Everyone thanks you for making it easy and open and accessible on the download side. One of the things I wanted to touch on was excitement. And I think that is like a key phrase that the listeners and Vlad have certainly heard me say every time we go to ICC. Every time we go and spend time with the inductive team kind of at any of the events, people coming up for the first time or the 20th time, everyone is always very excited to go talk about Ignition. For you two, during the creation, was it factory PMI days? Was it the 2010s when there was a lot of other consolidation? Where did that excitement start, or maybe when did you realize that Ignition was going to grow into something larger? Maybe not this large, but was going to grow into something larger?
Well, that's a tricky question. We're often asked, like, did you think it would get this big or whatever? Yeah. And I don't really like to answer that because so much of it has just been following our own passion for creating value that's driven all of it. And I think that's at the heart of why people are passionate about it, right? It's really easy to sell software that everyone loves and that works really well and is a really good value, right? I'll mention that because like the word value comes up a lot to me, because value to me is, somebody pays, $100 and they get $1,000 out of it or whatever, and scale, right? They get more out of it than they paid us. It's that simple. And honestly, today, even with our prices today, the ROI on Ignition, if you know what you're doing, should be inside weeks, right? Like, if not shorter. So, for me personally, like the excitement was always just being able to live my dream of creating things and that worked and that added value, right? And I'll let Carl go from there, but that's, what comes to my mind.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways you could sort of answer that question. But one thing that I really remember from the early days, so Steve had a lot of passion and very strong opinions about how the industry worked and how it could work better or what have you. And in the very early days, we sort of just had to take Steve's opinions, we had to take his word for it because we weren't very experienced. And then, within a few short years, we start talking to lots and lots of other systems integrators. And what was very exciting to me was, and kind of amazing, was the degree to which other systems integrators had almost a carbon copy of Steve's opinions and impassioned pleas for making things better or what have you. So that was a very exciting realization that there was this vein of need to be addressed in the market and that we were addressing it. So, building products that people want to use and find valuable is just, I think, innately exciting to do. Like it's great. It's a great position to be in. So it's really gratifying when the community, customers, integrators are excited about using our product. And I think part of that comes from our focus on enabling people to do more than they thought they could, faster than they thought they could do it.
Yeah.
And when people can do that, they're delighted. They're like, holy smokes, this is easier than I thought it would be. I had ideas and I could bring them to life faster than I thought I could. And that's just an exciting thing to do. So we love being in that enabling position.
No, Carl's answer is great on an external point of view. And it reminds me that, if there was a moment, I guess it was around when we started doing our conference, right? Which we called the Ignition Community Conference, which we just made that name up because we thought user conference was too normal. Kind of how we approach everything, right? You just got to make something up. But the conference was a super pain to pull off. We always dreaded it from an internal point of view. But once you're there, and this is now 15 years we've been doing this, right? Once you're there, it's like the most energizing moment of the year. And so I basically call it our January 1st. Like it's the start of our new year. When we do it in September, we come out of that with so much energy. And it's from the way that all these customers resonate with how we're solving problems that so many of them are having. Right. So, yeah.
That is a good answer. Yeah. That very first ICC was pretty mind blowing for us. We were really taken aback by the enthusiasm of the community, and it's infectious, right? Like that kind of enthusiasm sort of creates a virtuous upward spiral.
I would absolutely agree. I want to go jump us ahead a little bit in the journey to, in fact, my first ICC, which was, I think, 7 years ago, and the launch of Ignition 8.0, which gave us perspective and kind of reset the very high bar for Ignition and reset a lot of these tools, and thankfully gave us the ability to make much better looking HMI screens. We don't have to go into operator screens, as Vlad has heard this rant several times. But going and jumping ahead, Ignition 8.0 launches at the Ignition Community Conference, another kind of major landmark achievement from the entire Inductive Automation team. You guys opened the Blue Ravine headquarters, with a beautiful brand new facility. We all got to go and tour that and kind of moved everything a lot forward. As I look back, I kind of see it as a major step forward, a major shift forward towards the work that we're doing now and will continue. I guess, Colby, Carl, how do you guys remember it? How do you look at the Ignition 8.0 launch?
It was a lot of work. It was a hard time. My quick answer, I'll let Carl mostly answer this, but it's funny because you're right. It was such a monumental moment. And, for people who don't know us super well, our numbering system is just ridiculous. So just understand that. But, we started off with Ignition 7 because that sounded good. And when we said, we'll charge for every major release. And so then we released 7.1, 7.2, 7.3. We said, we'll just call that minor number the maja release. And that's how so anyhow. So when we finally got to 8, it was really like a big deal. And that was really when we rewrote, we did a lot of things, but two main things that come to mind. Obviously creating perspective, completely new visualization system. I'll let Carl talk about that. Then we rewrote the entire tag system and the data model internally for the scope and scale. But what I'd like to say about it was that from my point of view, it was still incremental. It was like, okay, we have all this experience with the software. We need to do these things to be able to enable where we want to go from here. And we did that. And then really in that moment, we weren't able to totally appreciate it because we had so many more ideas of where we wanted it to go. And that's why it comes up to probably the moment of just this last year, releasing 8.3, when Carl and I are talking about how this really completes our vision, right? So it's been this real process.
Yeah, the other thing we did with 8.0, just to support that narrative, is we totally rewrote the whole project system, and a big part of that rewrite was to have project resources be stored in open readable formats on disk. But we stopped short of actually taking that concept and rolling it out to the entire configuration landscape of the gateway, which is of course what we completed in 8.3. So yeah, 8.0 is certainly a big milestone. The release of Perspective is clearly a pretty major turning point, I think, in the capabilities of the product. But every release sort of always feels like us taking the next logical smallest step we can toward moving forward. It's just sometimes the smallest step you can take is quite large because you can't subdivide it, right? You're always trying to decompose a problem into steps you can reasonably take and test and deliver. And when you're doing something like Perspective, it's a big step all in one go. Or if you're going to rewrite the whole tag system, you have to do the whole thing. So that was a particularly large step. So was 8.3. It was, when it comes to the ridiculous numbering system, 8.3 probably deserved a slightly more
It should have been
significant
9, yeah.
designation, but here we are.
Absolutely. Vlad, I know your first ICC was with me a couple of years ago for the release or for the introduction of 8.3. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts being able to get thrust into it?
Well, I'll make a couple of comments, right? So to the earlier excitement comment, right? So I will say for me, it was incredible to hear from a couple of engineers who basically came to me and introduced me to Ignition, say that, hey, Vlad, you can just install this on your laptop. You can run it completely unlimited, right? You can test out all the features. And I think the fact that you can recognize that, even in larger corporations, it is very difficult to just sell this kind of a product into a director or VP, but instead you can have the engineers trial it out and then make the pitch of, hey, let's maybe put it in for a smaller system here for a skid and then grow from there is revolutionary, right? And again, I come from the industry, so I've certainly seen a lot of other vendors do it differently. 8.0, again, for me, was also a very interesting solution because, as you know, even on the technical side today, we don't see a lot of web-based deployments and designs, and just the simplicity again to access basically a SCADA from any device, right? So if you look at any other, again, like vendors, I still think that in 2026 it is not something that one would expect. Some of them obviously have made acquisitions and have slowly gotten there, but certainly not 7 years ago. So when I first saw 8.0 and the capabilities, and I went through to get my credential through the university, of course I was very impressed of the platform. Those were my impressions.
It's tricky because the technology moves so quickly. And so when we launched into that project, we had already for years, every year for probably 5 years or more, but before that, we would say, is this the year to go into web-based? Is this the year? And we'd feel like we were behind or whatnot. But so then leaping into it, I think, there's a lot of design principles and perspective that are built around the idea of like, okay, we're going into this technology, but we have to, still create something that will last for a long time in this industrial space, so that's the trick.
Yeah, and I will say, so I still have projects where vision projects are actively being developed, deployed, supported, right? And so it's not to diminish maybe the capabilities of that side. I think, again, those that have not been in the industrial environments don't always understand what, the requirements are for SCADA and MES systems that need to be extremely robust and resilient, and where maybe each one can fit. But there is I think there's an argument to be made that you need to an extent both sides to be able to develop different sorts of applications, either in vision or perspective. So, but anyways, like I said, for me, I was very excited to see what 8.0 was bringing. In terms of maybe to continue us forward to 8.3, right? So you've alluded to the numbering system maybe being a little bit strange, which basically means that 8.3 is a very big release, right? And I would hope that a lot of our listeners have already heard of 8.3 and probably at least looked at the features. But could you tell us maybe of the story of getting to 8.3, and then we can get into a conversation of talking about some of the biggest points of 8.3.
Yeah. So, it's a convoluted story, but we'll try to tell it as best we can. And I say convoluted because there is no 8.2, right? So 8.1 was out for 5 years. There was a 5-year gap between 8.1 and 8.3. Long time, much longer than our normal span between versions. And we had gotten into this sort of flow with 8.1 of kind of dripping features into it every month, basically, right? So we have this sort of roughly monthly, I think now it's more like 5 or 6 weeks, but we have this, cadence of incremental updates that we release. And in 8.1, we had gotten into this pattern of just adding new capabilities along the way because 8.1 was so stable and popular, and we had all these additional capabilities we wanted to add to it that weren't anything huge. But then we had the appetite to build some really, really big changes, and it took quite a while to get them in there because they were sort of really foundational pieces about how the platform works, how the configuration system works, and we had to, well, we wanted to and did rewrite the whole web interface of the gateway, which was a really massive undertaking. So there was just a lot of big pieces there, and so it took us some time to get it done. That's the journey of how we got there. Perhaps only interesting to me. It's kind of inside baseball stuff, but here we are. It's been out for quite a while now, and it's gaining quite a bit of traction because some really compelling capabilities that I think increasingly are going to become table stakes for a lot of different kinds of deployments, especially when you are trying to orchestrate and automate deployments or deal with environmental separation. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of features in 8.3 that have nothing to do with that, but I think those fundamental capabilities of 8.3 are going to become extremely important very quickly in every organization if they're not already.
Yeah, and I guess to maybe expand on some of those, right? Like as you mentioned, I think different features will matter to different stakeholders in very different ways. For me, it was certainly the DevOps side, right, and the scalable deployments, and we had a very interesting demonstration at Prove It of those capabilities by Travis and Kevin. But I guess to expand on that, there's been a revamp of the historian side, right? So there's going to be an addition of different data tools and capabilities. There's, of course, a bigger push on the data side, as I'm sure everybody is well aware of. There's a push on the AI side, which I think a lot of this enables those capabilities as well. So let me maybe take a pause a bit on the technical side, and let me ask you a more foundational question of, again, 8.3. You're having conversations with different groups, different verticals, different applications. How do you maybe synthesize some of their feedback and some of their requests into what is actually important, right? Because again, as I mentioned earlier, Ignition can be used on a small skid, just like it could be used to manage the entire enterprise, just like it can be used in oil and gas, food and beverage verticals that are fundamentally different. So I'm curious, how do you curate maybe those requests and that feedback from integrators and users and different groups? Colby, you've been
That sounds like an
quiet for
easy
a
question,
while.
Carl. Why don't you?
No,
So Carl already mentioned that a lot of our releases feel like the next logical step, right? And
Mhm.
so another really important moment in the history of Ignition was around the 7.6, 7.7 timeframe, which I want to say is like 2017, 2016, when we introduced the idea of the gateway network, which was a mode for connecting gateways together. And that really took the usage of Ignition from a single gateway into multiple gateways working together, right? And then Vlad, as you mentioned, the code base always scaled. It's written in Java. It's great. It could scale down to it's platform independent, can run a lot of different platforms, go from a Raspberry Pi up to a cloud server, right? So with these things together, our users just naturally, just organically grew out into much more distributed use cases. And so naturally that leads to then the question of, okay, how do I best manage these? And kind of, our journey all along the way has been, we push technology forward. We also observe where technology is going, and we try, with what we're doing in industry, what's going on in the broad world. And so over here in IT, very fortunately, there's this whole push towards, infrastructure management, infrastructure as code, orchestration, and all of this. And so I think with 8.3, it's really about pulling these together, both the use cases that customers were already on the path towards and where technology is at. And maybe we can continue. I don't know if there's more to say about that, but I just have to say, though, because so much of what we talk about is to orchestrate all this complicated stuff now and the demos we've recently been doing, I will emphasize that as a company, we care just as much about the systems integrator just trying to get a job done, build an HMI, as all of that as well. So I've gotten a lot of feedback, lately that like our demos are getting a little complicated. It's getting a little bit too far out. It's all about, it's our job, the way we see it, Carl and I see it. It's about, making the best of technology usable in the industrial space. Our litmus test is, can a normal systems integrator kind of learn this stuff and can it help elevate them to a degree, right? So there's a balance. It's an interesting challenge, but that's kind of how.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, 8.3 has lots and lots of features in it that have nothing to do with infrastructure orchestration, right? We've got quality of life improvements like drawing tools in perspective. We've got a much more consistent way to build attractive looking forms. We've got event streams, which is this very powerful way of connecting event-based or subscription-based data sources to anything you want. Your question was a tricky question, I think, to answer, which was sort of how do you synthesize and prioritize all the feedback you get and turn it into a coherent product strategy. That's sort of what I heard out of that question. Yes. I don't know if I have a good succinct answer to that, but that is the game, right? Like that question is what we try. Like that's sort of the magic formula, is doing that part well. And it involves a lot of what Colby just said. It's like first of all, we go and talk to customers all the time. We go visit them. We listen to what they're up to, and then we try to synthesize the sort of signal from the noise about what we're hearing. And that's a very important, feedback is one important angle. Another important angle is our own ability to sort of observe big technological trends, both in terms of what are the big trends that if we don't ride the wave of them, we risk being left behind technologically for some reason, but also what are those technologies that are ripe to pluck and build some sort of product surface area around and adapt to our industry. So both sort of opportunistically finding technological fits for our product space, as well as trying to make sure we keep the platform modern and relevant, because maintaining a platform like Ignition's not a young code base. And one of our most important things that we can do is maintain continuity going forward. And that means sort of a relentless, continual reinvention, right? We could have just kept going with Vision forever. Vision's a great product. People loved it. It was technologically incapable of running on mobile devices. And so I don't think it doesn't take a it doesn't take any great technological visionary to see that mobile capability is kind of an important one in the world of software, but it takes a lot of work and effort to do the work to take a code base that was invented way before the iPhone first came out and make sure it stays relevant in 2026. And so that's what we just continue to keep doing, listening to people and staying aware of technological trends that feel either ready or too big to ignore.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. One of the things we've talked a lot about infrastructure. We've talked about some of those big things. To Colby's point of sometimes some of the smaller foundational things may not be highlighted as much. One of my most recent kind of favorite additions, not necessarily module-wise to Ignition, is all of the launch pads and the continued expansion of the launch pads. It's not what I would necessarily go to use to start a project, but at the beginning of the year, I had an engineer who changed jobs, and so they changed jobs and they don't have SCADA, they don't have MES, they don't have visualization. And so as I was getting ready to go in and talk with them about what that could look like at their facility, one of their IT interns opened up I think it was the OEE Launchpad, and went and pulled in some machine data from an OPC UA server that existed somewhere that had some of the data. And over the course of, that first month or 6 weeks of the internship, we're able to go ahead and kind of prove out that initial use case, which was extremely valuable internally, of going and saying, hey, if we can do this, I wonder what would happen if we went and, networked all of the machines and equipment within our facility, and what sort of data and insights we can go ahead and get from that.
Well, that's a wonderful story, because that was, of course, the goal. Because, the way we sold the software originally was basically in the span of, you show up at a customer site, and in the span of talking to them, you've kind of on the side downloaded the software, found their, now you got an OPC server connected up, and you're showing something, right? And so, how do you, just make that easier and easier for everyone? And so Ignition Launchpad was launched earlier, or even towards the end of last year, to our systems integrator community, to try to give them, something they can just pitch with a quick ROI, right? Then we opened it up for everyone recently, so you can go to our website and search for it. And there's 2 different projects that we've created, and I think I don't know the exact plans, but if it makes sense to make more, we'll keep going on that route. But it's all about, Ignition has always been about proving value immediately, like just making data show up.
I think that comes from, when we got started, this industry is not quick to confer trust to a new player, right? If you show up in this industry and you've got some amazing, it doesn't matter how incredible your technology is, like, nobody trusts you right off the bat, nor should they. You need a track record, and it takes a long time to build a track record. And so one of our earliest strategies that you can see this through line continuing right up to the launch pads, it's the exact same thing. It's just what Colby said, is nobody trusted us. And so we said, great, don't trust us. We'll just show you that it works, like, really quickly. And then you don't need to trust us. You can just see for yourself.
It's valuable on its own. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we can start proving value really quickly. And then that's hard to argue against from a sales point of view, right? If you can show up, I think this was Steve's original sales strategy, right? Show up on site with factory SQL and solve some problem in an afternoon, and they won't let you leave without a license. That was his original MO of landing new customers.
I like it. I like it. So I suppose if I can transition us away from Launchpad, which is some of those very basic parts of Ignition, to the fairly newly released MCP server modules, and kind of the continuation into what artificial intelligence is going to look like. There was a lot of clapping at ICC last year when you guys announced, and I forget which one of you announced, but I believe one of the two of you announced that there was going to be a Inductive Automation Ignition branded MCP module. I guess take us through those thoughts. Maybe Carl, take us through what that build looked like, and what decisions you made, and did you leave it completely open? Did you help put some guardrails on it? I'm a big fan of guardrails, but take us through that journey, please.
You're asking this question at a particularly interesting moment, so I'm trying to figure out how to frame my answer. At ICC last year, I think it was the height of MCP mania. And to be clear, I think MCP is a valuable protocol that was an important piece of connectivity glue in the world of AI. And I'm very happy to have MCP functionality in Ignition. The MCP module, at least for now, at first, is a pretty raw toolkit for integrators and customers to author MCP primitives and serve them up through Ignition with access to anything they want to have access to in Ignition, right? So MCP is this, connectivity bridge between systems and AI agents so that AI agents can do things or learn things in systems they can't immediately get to, right? And I think that what we have released is sort of a pretty clear minimum viable product. I hope that nobody looking at that module looks at that and says, well, that's the end of the road for AI and Ignition, because I think there's some pretty clear things that we can and will do beyond that. But even as is, it's very powerful to be able to AI agents into Ignition in that way. And I think there are a lot of different use cases for why you might want to do so, that broadly fall into two major buckets of functionality. One is, how do I connect an agent to Ignition to help me build things in Ignition faster? And the other one is, how do I connect an agent to Ignition so the agent can get access to the industrial data that is inside of Ignition, so that I can do agentic reasoning workflows in my process. The guardrails as of now are totally DIY, because the tools are totally DIY, right? When you install the MCP server module, you don't have any tools, resources, or prompts unless you build them. So it's up to you at the moment to do that. I mean, there is authentication guardrails, but that's a pretty minimal surface area of guardrailing. So it's really about the design of the capabilities of the MCP server that the user surfaces. And we can't possibly guess what people might do with them, since it's just a bunch of raw toolkit. Now, I think people also were probably expecting us to author some first-party MCP primitives for Ignition. I think that we probably will end up doing that. But in order to do that well, to your point, Dave, we have to sort of understand better where those guardrails should be. And we're sort of building up that fluency ourselves with some experience. I guess we're a little more cautious on that end, because as soon as we author it, it has to live forever. We have to support it for a long, long time. So we have to be more careful about what that API surface area looks like. And B, the guardrails are more on us to define. So the move was, well, let's get something functional into people's hands so that they can start experimenting and playing as we build that second piece.
Let me maybe ask a more foundational follow-up, if I may, Carl, right? So I don't want to assume that all the listeners are very familiar with what's possible to build with AI, simply because, number one, the recent conversations even that I've been having is a lot of them are exposed to, let's say, a Microsoft Copilot, and they can query against whatever you put into the prompt. They generally understand that there's obviously like other LLMs and tools, but again, I would argue that not a whole lot from the end user standpoint, at least that I have seen, has been done when it comes to development. So I'm curious, maybe again, like, what are your thoughts in terms of what is possible? Is it to distribute the gateways better? Is it to configure the gateways? Is it build the UI screens? Is it to parse data? Is it all of the above? Like, I guess I'm assuming you're having some conversations and some discussions with both integrators and end users, but if you were to paint a picture to an end user that is maybe still on 8.1, doesn't understand the value, or hasn't experimented enough with AI, like, what are you seeing as the possibilities to come?
Okay, I want to make it clear that this answer is not MCP specific, but it's just
Correct.
AI.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, yeah. My answer is emphatically all of the above.
Mhm.
I think there is right now a lot of varying opinions about AI that are not very well distributed amongst people. I think, like, if your experience with AI is through a web chat interface, you're going to have a very different understanding of the capabilities of AI than if your experience is through an agentic system like Claude Code. You're going to have a very different understanding of capabilities. So the way I'm seeing it right now is that essentially a whole new sort of axis of software possibilities has opened up, and it is going to affect all software at capabilities and expectations going forward. So that's a very probably frustratingly non-specific answer, but that's really how I think about it. So, like, you can pick anything in software and imagine how it might be augmented with AI.
You said the other day that you compared it to the introduction of Windows from DOS, right? And I think that's kind of what he's getting at. When we went from DOS into Windows, it's a whole different way of thinking of how we interact with software, right? And that's kind of where this is leading towards, I think.
Yeah, and I would say, like, look, because I understand that it's a difficult question, right? And ultimately, I think end users are trying to figure out, is it us now paying the SIs less because now it takes a shorter amount of time to develop the tools? Is it that we can now leverage the data that we've had, inside of a historian or inside of a database, whatever that may be, better, right? Is it that we can add now a chatbot that can be deployed easier? That's why and again, these are the hard conversations, right? But the end users are ultimately trying to figure out, like, where the value is, what's possible, who do we bring in to implement some of these solutions? Do we do it internally, right? A lot of the plants, at least that I go to, don't have software engineers per se on site, and they're trying to figure out, are we hiring more now IT and software engineers versus previously predominantly OT to build out these solutions? It is, again, I would say it's more of a philosophical question and discussion, of course, but it is very interesting to hear, again, like, I think, like, your thoughts for the end user.
So sticking sort of to the philosophical end of things just a little bit, in my experience, every single time it is made that every time something is made easier to do, there's a lot of ink spilled about how the doers of that thing are in trouble because nobody's going to need their services anymore.
Sure.
And in my experience in software, that is not what actually happens, because what actually happens is, if something's easier to do, your ambition to do new, bigger things grows, right? In some sense, Ignition did this as well, right? Like when we showed up, Ignition made it easier to build OT applications than it was previously. And what happened? People dreamt up way more applications in the OT space than they were building previously, right? Just the scope of creativity and ambition just grew to fill that gap that was created by the thing I thought I wanted to make before is now easier to make. Great, now I'll make more stuff. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen here. Is it going to become faster and easier to design a perspective screen? Yep. Does that mean you're going to pay your SIs? No, it means you're just going to build bigger projects and have them be better. That's again, we're in the world of philosophy, so I guess time will tell if I'm right or wrong on this one.
Yeah, but a concrete example is the realm of legacy system replacement. There is so much legacy infrastructure out there
that's just not being done right now. It's not being converted because nobody has the time or ambition.
It's a national security risk for the United States, for all countries, right? There's all these, for private companies, the ransomware attacks, you see all these different things, right? And so that's just an area where you start to talk to people. Why aren't you doing it? Well, the value proposition.
It's too much work.
Too much work, right? So that's just one specific thing I'm always kind of talking about as like an early use case of if it's a lot quicker to convert, and not just because this is an interesting point, right? Because for us, talk about getting feedback, right? For so many years, people have said, when are you going to make conversion tools from this system to that system, right? Mm-hmm. And, from a business point of view, it might be in our favor to be like, yeah, you're right. Let's just make that conversion tool. And then what are you doing? You're replacing a 30-year-old system with a modern system that looks 30 years old, right? We never liked that. So we said, no, we don't do that because we want you to rethink the way you're approaching the problem. Okay, that's cool philosophically, but it's not very cool from a business point of view because they go, okay, well, I have to sit down and work on it. Well, what if, in the realm of generative AI now, like these industrial systems are, so you say, here's my system, make a modern version of these concepts, right? And we're not far from that. So those are some of the ways that I get excited trying to bridge these things together.
I'm very excited, I guess, to see the different ways. As you said, Colby, I think that we'll see AI being applied. I know there's quite a few companies that are trialing, right? And I use that very specifically because obviously plant floor systems are very rigid in many ways, but trialing, again, something like voice commands, right? So you give your SCADA a voice command, or you give it, an acknowledgement, let's say, of your faults and alarms, which again in the past wasn't as readily or possible, I would say, because of all the advancements in recent LLMs. So I think it is super interesting, right? But at the same time, again, it is important, I think, as Carl has mentioned, maybe to set some guardrails and figure out how do you make sure that, in a world that is very, very rigid and specific, you're protecting yourself maybe against some hallucinations, or at least in the early stages having human in the loop. So I'm curious, maybe your thoughts on some pushback and maybe some responses from the end users on that side.
Well, whenever a new technology comes out like this, we've seen it so many times already. There's always such a excitement around, early proof of concept use cases. So this is a very vast subject. And as you already mentioned, Vlad, you went through a lot of different use cases that this can be applied to. So you kind of have to tease those apart because, just talking to it and having it send some commands down is probably not what you want to do right now, to your point. But that doesn't mean there aren't, lots of, use cases that it can be applied to. One, I was trying to think of, I wish I could remember his name, but I just watched a video of, it's going around right now, an Anthropic engineer talking about, vibe coding and, vibe coding in production. And he's kind of, his kind of point, I think, which is valid, and we're not there yet, but it's like, the example he uses is like when compilers became a thing and like all the assembly programmers, like, well, do I trust this thing? I'm going to validate the assembly, and then pretty soon you have to trust it because the scope and scale of the problem grows, and then and the way you test the outcome and the way you can validate the outcome and all those things grow, and that's really important in this case, right? We'll get to a place, and that's how we see the role of Ignition, right? Like Ignition is the broker between these critical systems and all these technologies above it. And so how do we make that true in terms of, it's really, our focus at the moment.
I don't think it's a new thing that controls engineers are expected to apply some wisdom to the suitable uses of technology, of new technologies. And I think that's true here too. Do I think you should be putting, non-deterministic LLM decision making into a control plane? No. Do I think that LLMs have incredible value to provide in the plenty and plenty of tedious tasks or analyses or opening up surface areas for natural language querying that have nothing to do with trying to be right in the control plane? Absolutely. I think there's incredible value to be had there. So yeah, it takes a little bit, of awareness and responsibility on all our parts to find those suitable use cases and pick technologies well.
I will certainly continue to experiment. I always encourage the people that I work with to also experiment with AI and what's possible. And certainly, again, I think there's very different needs and different use cases depending, again, on the customer. I think we're going to see more and more successful applications. And of course, there's going to be some that may fall off the cliff. And that's just how the innovation curve goes.
For sure.
But yeah, let me, I guess, maybe as the last segment, I know that we've talked a little bit and we've mentioned ICC. What we didn't mention, and I guess I do want to have a short conversation about this, is all the technology providers that make the ecosystem successful. So Colby and Carl, maybe let me try to frame this to keep it short as well, because I know there's a lot of very exciting companies. What are maybe some interesting three, not necessarily specific solutions, but overall interesting innovations that you're expecting to see at ICC and or are part of the current ecosystem or short to be in the ecosystem?
All right. Well, they're like, yeah, right. So, we built Ignition from the beginning as with this platform vision. And so there is this ecosystem that's developed around it. And so now we call them technology providers to make it really inclusive, right? We used to call them partners, but then it's like, what if they compete with us? Like, how's that a partnership? So anyhow, just to say that, right? It's really a really wide spanning program. One that comes to mind, of course, is what we just announced a couple of weeks ago, that we have this new partnership collaboration with Tiger Data. So that's going to come in there at a high level. Tiger Data is the creator of Timescale DB, right? And so Timescale, for those who don't know, started as a time series extension to Postgres a little over 10 years ago. So Postgres, an open source database system, is extensible. So they extended it to create a time series optimizations for that. And then it's continued to develop. So now today, what that means is that you've got a relational database that's extremely capable with time series data, and you get to really play with how those can interact in interesting ways. And so people have been, because it's based on Postgres, people have been using Ignition with Timescale for years now. It's pretty naturally compatible with our tag historian system. But we also get asked on both sides all the time, why don't you guys work together to do more? And so that's exactly what we're doing right now. So we're very excited around the ICC timeframe to continue to show off what that means.
Awesome.
Outside
Carl?
that, go ahead, Carl.
I'm trying to figure out how to answer this top three framing for the question. I'm not sure that I can. The technology ecosystem is. I'm really glad we created a formalization for something that was happening anyhow, right? Ignition has never existed in a vacuum. Ignition doesn't have really any vertically specific functionality, and it's always required other technologies to really make it work well, right? Brokers or databases at the most basic level. But I'm always really excited to see when companies sort of provide that like last mile adaptation to specific verticals. This is right. So we purposefully keep Ignition as horizontal as possible, right? We are sort of synthesizing the common framework required that could then be adapted to any industry on Earth, which is great. But it also means that sometimes customers have a bit of a DIY project ahead of them to build something, which I think many of them, it's exactly what they want because they want to build something custom fit, exactly what they need. But it's also really interesting to see when companies come up with specific products that are built on Ignition, right? You know, everyone talks about how their product's a platform, and that's, I guess, all in vogue now, but we've been doing that for quite a long time. And I think that the number of products that are built and deployed on Ignition show how successful that strategy has been for us. And so I love seeing when products are built on Ignition as a platform. It's really sort of validating to our whole approach.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I guess before I pass it back to Colby for maybe a few other thoughts, it could be like for me, it's even something as simple as a technology provider that creates again an IPC with Ignition pre-installed on it, right? That I can just basically order and ship to the customer without having to recommission a new gateway, right? So it doesn't have to be some breakthrough is what I'm thinking, right? It could be like things on the PLC side that make data more readily available. It could be, you know, like different protocols that are made available again by different technology providers. So I think it's just interesting to have this conversation because again, as you've mentioned, as you both have mentioned, there's more and more solutions that are entering the ecosystem and making it easier again to develop for the end user.
Well, what's one area that's kind of fascinating to me from a very outside, I mean, I'm pretty distant from it, but it's the MES space is kind of interesting. There's a lot of people that continues to be a hot space. And of course, you know, we've had a longstanding relationship with Sepasoft and their product, and now there's others showing up in the ecosystem. It's just fascinating to me. So I kind of observe that as it's just an interesting space, right? And then recently, of course, there's so many talking about, you know, enterprise connectivity and cloud, you know, the kind of continue, you know, we ourselves have always tried to push data up. We've with Cirrus Link, with MQTT and whatnot, we've been sending data around forever. But now to see the application space kind of building more structurally between that with some of these providers is pretty fascinating. So those are two areas I like to watch in that space.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Dave, thoughts?
Yeah, no, fantastic answer, guys, especially for a question that Vlad specifically gave you 3 options to say yes. And there are only, 50 or 60 other technology ecosystem providers who may or may not want to know why they're not at the top of the list. So fantastic question, Vlad. Fantastic answer, guys. I would say one of the things that I really loved about the move to the Safe Center for ICC this year was the fact that you can see so much of the technology ecosystem. And we went from having, 2 or maybe 3 dozen booths to having 50 or 60 or potentially even more. And you can go and have that experience of go talk to a technology ecosystem provider who hopefully can solve your problem, or if they can't solve your problem, can probably direct you to someone who can. And I feel like that is a really good, really valuable experience if people show up looking to go solve those problems. Having said that, Carl, Colby, this has been a fantastic conversation. We want to make sure to ask you guys the questions that we ask all of our listeners. And in regards to the listeners, we've had a bunch of comments from them saying really positive things about both of you and Ignition. So thank you to the listeners for listening. So the first one is my most favorite question. It is predict the future, right? And I guess I'd love to know either the future of where you guys think artificial intelligence is going, or if you guys would like to bite off, what do you predict the future of Ignition as a platform looks like?
I think you've noticed from the nature of this conversation, everything else we've done, we're not big on making big, bold claims. You know, it's an interesting time. I think, but it's not, to me. I don't know. I'm a big fan of history. History repeats itself. It's, I don't get too gloomy about it. I think there's, yeah, predicting but I'm just going to dance around to try to say that predicting the future right now is a fool's errand. I guess I could try to say some philosophical things, but I don't know. I'm going to punt to Carl.
I'll be a little bit more. I'll be a little less wishy-washy than Colby. I am confident in the prediction that everything's about to get a lot easier.
Okay.
That things that used to be hard are about to get easier. We could stop getting new foundation models today and continue using what we already have with model capabilities and building value around them for years. So where is AI going to go from here? I don't have any prediction about that. I'm a product guy. I'm not an AI. We're not an AI research company, right? But as a product guy, I am confident that even if I never get another model that's more capable than the ones I have today, I can build product value that is going to be very exciting with the models I have today. So that's a confident prediction because I'm in control of that part. I'm in control of building the product around the capabilities that are already possible today.
Okay. I like that. The models we do have today are fascinating, as Vlad has heard me say over and over again. Just watching every 3 to 6 month segment over the course of the last 2 years. If we were 2 years ago starting to have this conversation, we in our wildest dreams couldn't predict us as to where we are today. So to Colby's point, I also say it is the most difficult question anyone can possibly ask, because all we know is that we're going to be wrong no matter what the prediction looks like.
Well, there is a graph you can find, and I wish I had on hand, but that's, kind of tries to show, with positive outcome, what's the length of task AI can currently pull off. And that chart going over time is exponential, right? It's doubling essentially every few months, right? Which reminds me of, the CPU race of, the 80s, 90s into the early 2000s. And so, that's exciting. So that supports Carl's point of, things are just getting easier because the amount of work we can ask these things to do is increasing, right? In the industrial space, which is always so slow to refresh technology, we've seen an acceleration coming from, the time when we got started, when people would say, I need to build a system for 20 years. And we go, that's coming down. COVID, I keep saying, pulled us forward a decade in terms of technology adoption, late adopters being open to new ideas. And now with the accelerated pace of making things easier, as Carl said, I'm excited over the next, few years to, as I've already touched on, if nothing else, make the world more secure by replacing a lot of these legacy systems out there. That's just one concrete point that I like to see happen. So,
to the point of things changing so quickly, for sure. And if you had asked me that question 8 months ago, I would have given you a very different answer. And I expect if you asked me that question 8 months from now, I probably would give a very different answer again. But I still don't think my previous answer would be wrong.
Yeah, I would say I feel like you've given us the best predict the future answer that you could have, Carl, and two, just maybe in general. As I tell our listeners, don't go listen to the cybersecurity experts predict the future questions, because it's going to make you want to go live under a rock. But I very much like the direction you've taken with that, Carl. So I appreciate that. The next, we'd like to ask for some career advice. So typically, we say, if someone is early to mid-career, what's the best advice you give them? Maybe we can ask the question for you too. So if a younger junior developer engineer comes to work for Inductive Automation, what is the best piece of career advice you both would give them?
Carl, do you want to go first, or should I?
If
I
you
would
got
say,
something, go for it. I'm puzzling over it.
well, I mean, look, to some degree, the fundamentals of what have always made someone a good software developer are understanding abstractions, understanding the problem you're trying to solve, and how systems work. And I think that's just so vital right now. It kind of we're being very fluid. I know from Carl and I's point of view, we both look, I started developing code when I was 13 years old. That's part of my identity. I'm happy to throw it out the window and do it in a different way because it's the systems and the outcomes that matter, right? So, this has always been a challenge with new software developers, is to understand the systems, understand the problem, understand how to architect systems.
All right, I got three pieces of career advice.
Okay.
One is don't underestimate soft skills.
Yeah.
Writing is very important. Listening, active listening, working in a team. These are skills that they're timeless and more important than ever. The second one is don't let anybody outsource your context understanding for whatever context you're in, whatever business context, product context. If you're a technical person, strive to understand everything you can about not the technical context, but the application context into which the technology is being applied, because you will be so much more valuable to your organization if you have taste and opinions that come from understanding the application context that you are trying to apply technology to. And the third one is become fluent in some sort of agentic tool, Claude Code or similar.
Okay.
I'm not saying that's going to be the tool forever, but it's the tool today.
Yeah, all of those were fantastic. Thank you both. Next, we like to ask our listener, we like to ask our guests for a book or content recommendation. Colby, I think you have a book recommendation to kick us off.
I forget what I said last time, because there's a book that I always come to, which is called the Founder's Mentality. It happens to always be on my desk, right? I love this from a business building point of view. A lot of cool insight. But if I mentioned that last time, which I don't recall, I will say that as a leadership group, we just recently read a book by Bob Chapman, co-author with Raj Sisodia, he did Conscious Capitalism, called Everybody Matters. So Bob Chapman was the CEO of Barry Waymiller, the parent company. Maybe some of our listeners know Design Group as their integration company. Barry Waymiller, the parent company, is an interesting, fascinating story. And Bob just recently passed away, unfortunately, but his son Kyle Chapman continues the legacy laid out in this book. And so it's a fascinating book about how to approach business in a way that just isn't very common these days, which is really trying to, as they say, build vibrancy between the human element and the business element. And so it's an inspirational story from a company that's just an amazing case study. So if you're interested in business, and I think for some of us in this technology space, it's easy to get just a little discouraged by the way technology business works right now on the whole. So that's one recommendation.
No, fantastic. Yes, thank you so much. Carl, did you have a book or content recommendation for us today?
Sure. If you are skeptical and looking to sort of see what all this AI agentic coding stuff is about, the book Vibe Coding that came out a few months ago is quite good.
Okay. Good.
If you want a break from all the technology stuff and read something else, I just read Sapiens, which I think came out quite a few years ago, but I really enjoyed.
Okay. No, that's awesome. Thank you for 4 fantastic book recommendations, you guys. Next question, new question for this year is an innovation question, right? So if you guys could start anything, what direction would you look at? What do you think is kind of ripe for innovation?
I saw this question and I really, it's funny because I've been in this space for so long. I almost when I was younger, I would always have all these ideas, but like the more I've gotten sort of I know what it takes now to like bring an idea actually through to market. I know how, like, what it really takes. So I'm much more circumspect these days about my wild ideas.
Your wild idea were several portions of Ignition 8.3.
Right.
Well, that's part of my answer is that it's funny because so many of look, you could go big picture, like what should be disrupted in the big broad world. And I'm sure there's lots of frustrating things I can think of, but in terms of like the industrial space where we operate, part of the frustration is like, we've had so many good ideas for so long. Some of them you're starting to see trickle out now that we're like, hey, we thought about that a long time ago. It's like, okay. So we got a whole, backlog of ideas that we could work on. So I don't want to give any of them away yet, but
I would in general, I would say for people who are chasing down new ideas, which I encourage is a lot of fun to do, make sure you don't have a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah.
Make sure you're solving someone's actual problem first, not just you have a cool idea and then you look to see what kind of, you have a cool technological idea and then you hunt for a problem that it might solve. I see a lot of people doing it backwards that way. And I think it's very, very difficult to build a company that way.
That's the engineering's dilemma, right?
Yeah.
No, I was going to say things. Go ahead, Dave.
I have heard a lot of people use a similar phrase, Carl, to people coming out and building their first portions of software that they've just vibe coded over the weekend, right? It is a solution looking for a problem as opposed to the alternative. And so we've got lots of great software that's going to go sit on a local host somewhere and never turn into anything other than experience.
That's all valuable research, but it's just not,
it's not a product.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Guys, this has been fantastic. Last question for you both is how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who are you looking to connect with? How can people find you? What sort of conversations are you looking to have?
People can help us by selling more ignition. I mean, integrators. That's how you get it. No, look, we've mentioned ICC a number of times this year. Again in September, again in Sacramento at the Convention Center. The website is up now, icc.inductiveautomation.com. And the theme this year is Innovation Unleashed. And it always kind of happens that the theme kind of sets the tone for the year, and you start to see these things resonate. That unleashed aspect, which is very raw, very provocative to degree, is certainly playing out. I think we're going to have a lot of really cool things to talk about at ICC. So go sign up.
That's fantastic. Carl, anything else to add?
I liked that answer. Come find us at ICC. That's where we'll be.
Absolutely. It is hard to miss you two at ICC. If you go into any of the main keynotes, it is very hard to miss you two right up stage, front and center. But Carl, Colby, this has been fantastic. Thank you guys for spending time with us here. We look forward to seeing you again at ICC, if not at some point before. If our listeners have made it this far, thank you guys so much. Make sure you're following Carl and Colby and Inductive Automation, as well as Vlad, myself, and Manufacturing Hub. If you guys have made it this far on YouTube or on podcast format, you guys are absolutely fantastic. Please give us a thumbs up and rate us 5 stars and subscribe and do all that stuff. When you guys do that and we release podcasts on Thursday, more people listen, which is absolutely fantastic. And please feel free to tell